English translation 698th Contact Tuesday. The 2nd of January 2018, 21:38 hours.
Oh, I am just in time for that. Greetings and welcome all you Enjana and also you Florena, as but also you Kolkos.
Thanks. I also greet you, and I'm glad to see that you are well.
Dear father friend, I join you and we are officially coming today because Ptah will not be able to visit you again until February. On the one hand, he has instructed us to tell you that it has been unanimously declared by the board that with regard to the question you raised during his last visit on the 17th/18th of December in connection with the Earth foreigners, there are no directives that would not permit an answer. On the other hand, we are also following his order to give you the ascertained number of the total Earth population, which, according to our clarifications, occurred exactly at midnight at the turn of the year on the 31st of December 2017. Enjana will tell you the exact number.
Greetings also from me, Edward, my friend.
Thanks. What you mentioned. Florena, you must mean the question of whether the Earth foreigners, who have been whizzing through the earthly skies with their UFOs for I do not know how long, have stations on Earth, and how long have they been here? Wait a minute, please. Look here in the computer. Ptah said the following about that on the 18th of December.
Not all of what can be observed of alien and unidentified flying objects in the global distance refers to Earth foreigners or to Earth future, because certain of these objects correspond to purely Earth man-made and military secret flying apparatuses. However, as far as invisibility is concerned with regard to those others who are Earth foreigners or Earth future, we have no knowledge of this because we do not maintain any contacts with them, nor do we endeavor to enter into such contacts with them. Our interest is exhausted by trying to find out their origin, which we have not yet succeeded in doing. I have also not been able to find anything so far that would indicate anything more than observations and explorations by these Earth foreigners and Earth future. As for your question about the Earth foreigners and stations on Earth, as well as how long they have been on Earth, we do know that, but I can only tell you about it, but not publicly, because I am not sure whether there are directives about it that forbid an open explanation or not. But I will ask about that.
Yes, I know, because during the conversation with Ptah, I also asked whether these Earth foreigners had stations here on Earth and how long they had been here. He said that he could tell me, but not officially, because it was something he did not know whether there were directives about it that forbade an open answer, but he would ask about it. Is that what this is about?
Yes, that is the case, and it may be openly spoken about, as Ptah clarified.
That is correct, and I have to explain that the Earth foreigners you mentioned, or their early ancestors, were already present and active here on Earth in prehistoric times, as they were afterwards, but also again and again throughout all the ages of the Earth, throughout all the ages and epochs of the world. The various epochs and each era of the ancient history of the planet are to be reckoned in millions of years, during which the Earth foreigners came to Earth again and again, whereby, however, as Ptah has already explained to you several times, as he mentioned, we have not been able to fathom their effective origin until the present time, whereby we have, however, been able to discover that even these Earth foreigners no longer know their own prehistoric origin. Our research so far has only revealed that their prehistoric ancestors came into the Dern universe from another space-time structure or from another dimension, unknown to us so far, and then also reached Earth on other SOL system planets. But as far as the origin of the distant and present-day Earth foreigners, and thus very distant descendants of those who came to Earth again and again in prehistoric times, and also afterwards is concerned, Their most distant descendants also come here to this day, whereby they also have stations on Earth. As far as their present origin is concerned, we are very well aware of their present world of origin and the system, although we have no need whatsoever, and our directives also forbid us to make ourselves noticeable and recognizable to them, or even to make contact with them.
Oh, so Ptah did not mean that you do not know where these Earth foreigners of the present time come from or just where they come from. I guess I'm a strawhead on that one, because I always thought you guys were guessing about their present-day place of origin.
Well, you were wrong about that, which is why you should not call yourself a strawhead, because being wrong is not a disgrace if a matter is not fully explained and not made clear.
But that should not be Ptah's mistake, but mine, because I did not question his explanation.
You can see what you are referring to as an error as you like, but being wrong has nothing to do with conscious wrongness, and therefore also nothing to do with guilt.
Whereby you are probably right. And if I can now raise a question, then I will once again ask whether it is permissible to speak openly today that you also know about the Earth future, precisely from which Earth future time they come. Ptah said that for certain reasons it was necessary to wait before speaking openly in this regard, for which he gave me the reasons.
Yes, that is indeed so. Because to give open information about it, we must continue to wait, because a clarification at the present time might not be advisable for the future, as Ptah has already explained to you, because...
Yes, he explained about 3 years ago that, so I do not want to ask any more. It was really thoughtless of me to want to talk openly about it. Somehow, it was just that I wanted to speak openly about the matter in order to be able to make something clear to the Earthlings for the future, so that they take a better path and walk along it peacefully. But I would still be interested to know what you think of these people who always claim, lie, and fantasize as busybodies and alleged UFO contactors and knowers, etc., that extraterrestrials, also so-called reptiloids, etc., would participate in governments on Earth without being recognized, which Ptah, Simyase, and Quetzal, as well as Asket, denied.
Concerning your question about lying or confused claims that alleged Earth foreigners or extraterrestrials and reptiloids, etc., as you say, are active in earthly governments, our assessment corresponds to the fact that all these persons in their consciousness reality are addicted to disorders of mind and reason, as well as to the need for self-portrayal, but they also have delusions and also show strong tendencies to lie. Many are also pathologically out of touch with reality and therefore do not orient themselves to reality and truth, but to hallucinations, fantasies, illusions, self-deceptions, sensory illusions, and mirages that are out of touch with reality. Many simply allow themselves to be influenced and guided by lies and deceptions, and as a result of their own ignorance, weakness of intelligence, and inability to cultivate their own clear thoughts and reflections, fall prey to a stupid faith, as is also the case with any belief in God.
And as is the case with all religions and with all sectarianism.
I also see it that way in these respects, to which I must say, however, that I too was very much mistaken, because I thought that when you call up the openly conducted conversations with us in each case and write them down, you do so in your mother tongue, to which I was instructed that you reformulate our conversations conducted in Swiss German into High German and put them down in writing in this way.
That is so, of course, because in the entire German-speaking world, which includes German-speaking Switzerland, High German is written and read, or, as it is also called, Schriftdeutsch. Swiss German is actually only spoken and little written, and if it is, then only corresponding books, etc.
Which, however, is fundamentally different from Swiss German and requires that you have a good command of the German language, because in order to correctly translate a language and its expressions, terms and words into another language in the correct way, you need a good command of the language and a good knowledge of the language.
Which my father friend does not lack.
Thanks. But I also find that with you, Kolkos, Because in the short time that you have been here, and have already visited me privately on several occasions, you have learned Swiss German so well that no German-Swiss human being would recognize you, just like Florina and Enjana, who, like Ptah and Quetzal, have been speaking perfect Swiss German for years, as coming from the Plejaren. If we Earthlings would learn a language so quickly, so well, and so perfectly, we could consider ourselves lucky in this respect.
We also have much better possibilities and conditions for language learning than the human beings here on this world.
1-0 for you, Enjana, by which I mean that you are right, of course. But will you please tell me what the clarification on the 31st of December revealed in relation to the total number of the Earth's population? Further, I would be interested to know what Ptah has found further to my private question from the annals of Sfath in relation to the times I have been traveling with Simyase, Quetzal and Peta and other space-time structures after Asket.
Of course, we digressed from that with our conversation. Our very close monitoring, checks, and clarifications have revealed an Earth population of 8,844,128,002 human beings at midnight on the 31st of December, 2017. And if I am to answer the further question, Ptah instructed me to give you the figure of 3 years and 167 days for the period from the 28th of January 1975 to the 31st of December 2017. To this, he also stated that the total time of all your absences from the present time was 30 years and 102 days.
Thanks. So that's a little over 105 million more Earthlings again, who will also contribute to the further destruction of Earth in the future, but about which it is probably not necessary to say more. And for the time mention of 3 years and 167 days, I will let Ptah thank you, but I will also tell him personally. But what interests me now, Kolkos, you told me during your visit last week, and during our private conversations, that you are particularly interested in Antarctica, in our SOL system and the planet Jupiter, which was supposed to become a twin sun or a second sun in our solar system, but due to some circumstances did not become a sun. Consequently, you want to find out about this. You have explained that such a near star develops within a collapsing interstellar cloud, whereby it has already almost reached a hydrostatic equilibrium and finally becomes a star or a sun through a steady, gravitationally induced increase in mass from the surrounding cloud. But this is not the case with Jupiter, because it somehow got stuck in its development, so to speak. Sfath, the father of Ptah, already tried this, but found nothing out. He also once took me to this very interesting giant planet, in which the Earth would have more than 1,000 times the space, and explained to me that Jupiter has about 12 or so different and storm-walling belt-like weather systems moving around the planet, each one separately from the others, racing around the planet for hundreds or even thousands of years as primeval thunderstorms with tremendous speed. In the process, Sfath explained, all of these belts would have different weather systems, acting like different massive billowing bands moving around Jupiter, different speeds and also different temperatures, with liquid diamond rain falling in some cases. He also let me see the red spot, which is an enormous storm and was already working when Sfath took me there, and explained that according to the Plejaren records, it had been raging for 489 years, but that it had been slowly receding for some time, which could also be determined by earthly astronomers after about 1970, but I have not yet heard or been able to read anything about this. Sfath also let me look at the moon Io and explained that there was an unusually extreme volcanism on Io, which was unmatched by any other celestial body in the entire SOL system. What was extremely interesting were the lava fields, which I remember very well, because many of them were curved like bubbles. Sfath explained that this was because the ground on which the lava flowed had very low minus temperatures. Sfath also took me to various volcanoes and their lava fields on Earth. But I never noticed anything similar to what I did on Jupiter's moon Io in 1947, in that very hot summer when 47 degrees Celsius were measured in Niederflach. From March to October, not a drop of rain fell, and the sugar pears and Bernese rose apples also blossomed twice and actually produced fruit that was small but still edible. This, while everywhere the meadows and fields withered and exceptionally poor harvests were harvested. When the rains finally came towards the end of October, primeval thunderstorms erupted, and it seemed as if the sky was on fire. Strangely, however, there is nothing about this hot summer in the Swiss meteorological records, which is why I have asked various old people over the last 40 years about this weather phenomenon, which occurred 2 years after the atomic bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, to which Svath explained that the whole thing was the result of these crimes. In Schmidruti, in the restaurant Freihof, an old man from Chalcheg remembered this hot summer, as did another older man from Schmidruti, both of whom also mentioned the 47-degree heat, without I giving this information, so they confirmed what I had experienced in Niederflachs at that time. Even the father of Liesel Silvano's girlfriend, who lived in southern Germany, was able to remember the heat phenomenon at that time, and also confirmed that it was 47 degrees Celsius, that a lot of meadows, fields, and gardens withered, and that there was a water shortage everywhere. Silvano was also interested in this and asked around, about which he also wrote an article that was inserted into the contact reports, Pleiadian Plei-Yaren contact reports, Block 6, page 15. But as far as Antarctica or the South Pole is concerned, which you are also interested in, Kolkos, I can tell you that Svath, Ta's father, took me there as early as the 1940s, then Quetzal too in the 1980s, where they let me see many interesting things by diving with their beam ships. The seabed in Antarctica was full of diverse plant life, but also of creatures such as octopuses, as these 8-footed creatures are also called, which with over 100 species form the largest genus within the true octopus family. Fish and other life forms were also present, although these were lighter to whitish in color, so not as dark as the life forms in the warmer ocean waters.
What you say is very interesting, and it now urges me to make your observations myself as well. Thanks for your comments.
You're welcome, but one more question for you, Florena, because you are dealing with meteorology, and I spoke earlier about my observation that in 1947 there was a heat of 47 degrees in Niederflachs. But no meteorological records can be found about this at the Bundesamt für Meteorologie und Klimatologie. As early as 1863, 88 weather stations existed in Switzerland with the support of the Confederation, after which the Federal Council decided to found the Meteorologische Zentralanstalt EMSA in 1880. However, the name Meteorologische Zentralanstalt was changed to Schweizerische Meteorologische Anstalt SMA in 1979, after which the name was changed again in 1996 to Meteoschweiz. And since 2006 the official title has been Bundesamt für Meteorologie und Klimatologie Meteoschweiz. Since then, Meteo Swiss has been responsible for observing the weather around the hours and producing weather forecasts, also issuing warnings to the population and emergency services, such as when storm winds, heavy precipitation, thunderstorms, snowfall, icy roads or heat waves are imminent. The economy also requires certain specialized weather forecasts, as they also cover the needs of professionals and sportsmen who carry out their activities outdoors. But the comprehensive weather services also include civil, military, and private aviation. Meteo Swiss has 5 locations, namely the headquarters at Kloten Zurich Airport, then others in Arosa, Geneva, Locarno, and Payerne, which are served by 2 Cray XE6 supercomputers from the Swiss National Supercomputing Center in Lugano, among others, for weather forecasting.
That is interesting. But we are familiar with the old, very inaccurate records made by the Swiss Meteorological Institute, just as inaccurate measurements are made and equally inaccurate records are kept even today. The reason for this is that in many cases only average values are worked out for certain areas. which do not take any locally specific data into account, which would be necessary, however, because a general average value cannot simply be assumed. Real meteorological measurements and evaluations must be measured, registered and elaborated locally and area-wise, otherwise completely false and misleading results will be produced which in no way correspond to reality.
Yes, Quetzal also said that in 1989, Pleiadian-Plejaren contact reports, Block 6, pages 15/16, sentences 163 to 178. But if I may now address something else, then I would like to know from you. Enjana, because you are psychologically educated and among other things deal specifically with the characters of earthly rulers and politicians, how you judge the German Chancellor Angela Merkel. You do not have to do a technical paper as an explanation, because it's enough for me if you can give a brief outline of her overall mindset.
In this way, I can say without a doubt that this woman is addicted to a pronounced lack of conscience and is unteachable and unpredictable and, moreover, compulsively enforces, against all reason and resistance, her wrong thoughts, ideas, and resolutions once they have been conceived. It is further to be judged that this woman is unusually strongly marked by an obsession with power, which she, however, endeavors to cover up to the outside world by presenting herself to her co-rulers and the population in a perfidiously false and mendacious manner as a gracious, patronizing, good-natured, philanthropic, and self-confident woman. In truth, she is afflicted with a very profound selfishness, which is so pronounced that she only allows her own and very often illogical opinions, which she often takes and changes again wantonly and thoughtlessly, to be valid and enforces them, without any concern for what serious consequences may result. Also connected with these three decisive and momentous factors is her pronounced irresponsibility.
And that what you say actually applies to this woman is proven by the catastrophe she has caused throughout Europe, Africa, Arabia, and the Near East with her refugee welcome culture, as a result of which many thousands of human beings, refugees of all kinds, have risked their lives in a miserable way and fled to their deaths and continue to do so. But this conscienceless woman does not mind because she does not give it a second thought. Seen correctly, she should actually be held accountable as a murderer for her refugee-welcoming culture and the thousands of deaths that resulted from it, and put behind bars for the rest of her life. She should also be held accountable for the fact that her refugee-welcoming culture has allowed an unimagined number of criminals, terrorists, and work-shy people as well as other antisocials and parasites to come to Europe and now wreak their ever-increasing havoc. This woman has no idea whatsoever what the meaning of life is, just as she has no idea what the true nature of human beings is, let alone what the meaning of birth, life, death, and dying is, and why we human beings are here in the first place. From this it follows that this ruler cannot in any way grasp even a brief thought that she would have to change and consciously turn her overall mind into the good and positive in order to be able to exercise the office of a Chancellor of the Right, which she has wrongly pursued.
What you say, I also see and understand.
The whole thing of a change in this respect, or a change for the good, better and positive, does not only refer to this power-hungry Mrs. Because in principle the majority of humanity also needs this change, however not with regard to the abandonment of greed for power, but with regard to its general indifference and obedience to authority. In this respect, everything has degenerated to such an extent that the majority of the entire humanity of Earth does not care at all about how states and peoples are fundamentally run and why they must be run democratically, namely because they themselves do not know what democracy actually means, but also because they prefer to leave the leadership to the upper elites than to take care of it themselves in a democratic way in a popular community. Thus, the people simply let their authorities have their way and do as they please, for good or ill, instead of waking themselves up from their laziness of thought and thinking about everything that is necessary and acting correctly. This also includes public discussions and rallies as well as voting, through which clear fronts are created and the will of the people is implemented in a democratic manner, as is the case, for example, in Switzerland, which is the only state on Earth to be subject to a legally regulated semi-democracy. Furthermore, it must also be said that not only the majority, but practically all human beings on Earth must change their entire attitude with regard to their responsibility in every respect, and that towards the better, the good and the positive, which means that everything must be thoroughly considered, and that profound understanding and clear, logical reason must also be worked out and brought to bear. This is also urgently necessary if peace is to be created in the world, whereby the whole of this, however, already begins with the individual human being, must be cultivated in every family and also spread and brought to bear in acquaintances, friendships, schools, organizations, armies, and in the entire world population. Only then, when every human being and all human beings make a good, positive and correct effort to make the necessary changes in themselves and to carry out all the necessary change, can real peace and a grasping freedom be created in the whole world. If every human being, and if all human beings, do not change, and if they do not change in a way that is capable of reason and rationality, just as the rampant overpopulation is not stopped, then sooner or later it will inevitably result in the human beings of the Earth destroying themselves, and possibly also the planet. If this results, then an apocalyptic war or a complete collapse of the function of nature as a result of overpopulation will be the end of humanity and the Earth. The only salvation that can still be achieved is that a new consciousness should arise in all human beings on Earth, which must be taught and introduced. Furthermore, a special responsible elite must take control of the nuclear and all other weapons of war, and create a world that lives in peaceful coexistence. This elite must appease the peoples and teach them to lead a new peaceful and free world themselves without state powers addicted to the lust for power. I have also expressed this with this saying here, which I created yesterday.
The folks must wake up the reigning and all the upper elites and the big shots have all the might of the world in their hands and can exercise Gewalt, 1, and domination over the all-enduring folks are exerting. Until they finally remember their rights democracy, wake up and stop fighting and stop groveling like dogs before those who govern them. Simyase Silver Star Center, January 1, 2018, 1702 HRS, Billy.
Only through this can there be a peaceful Earth world in the centuries to come, which will then at last be free of all old hatreds, revengeful behavior, wars, murder, and destruction, and can adorn itself with peace, freedom, and great progressive scientific wonders valuable to Earth humans. It is also to be said that in the future, ancient and very valuable knowledge will have to be rediscovered and utilized. But this can and must only be when the bulk of Earth's humanity will have attained an appropriate higher level of consciousness. Because otherwise, as has unfortunately been the case with Earthlings since time immemorial, everything would be misused for wars, mischief, criminality, crime, and the subjugation of peoples. The fact is that there is effectively nothing real on Earth that is not reality and not truth, whereby a religious or sectarian belief does not belong to it, but corresponds to a fictitious belief or something imagined. Reality and its truth can never be imagination, fiction, illusion, fantasy, hallucination, fixed idea or pretense of false facts, etc. But only that which is demonstrably tangible, can be grasped intellectually and rationally as reality, can be proven and demonstrated. And for this proof, either physically tangible, recognizable with the eyes, tangible with the body, or facts that can be evaluated solely by a clear mind and an incontrovertible reason are necessary. But this can never apply to a belief of any kind, because such a belief is on the one hand intuitionistically unprovable, and on the other hand logically based solely on an assumption. Conception or assertion, on an opinion, a view, a hope, a hypothesis, speculation, conjecture, theory, assumption, imagination, or an insinuation. Consequently, a religious and sectarian belief remains a conception. Attitude, outlook, mentality, expectation, etc., which remains absolutely unprovable and therefore incomprehensible in any logical, rational, and intellectual way. The greatest evil of human beings since time immemorial is that they strive for might and want to dominate their fellow human beings, rule over them, and elevate themselves above all others. In doing so, they develop an obsession with power, or an obsession with power that knows no bounds and leads to vicious, degenerate violence up to and including human bestiality, wars, intrigues, murders, bloodlust, and every conceivable kind of degeneracy. And this began with human beings in primeval times for many reasons and has continued up to the present time, whereby innumerable human beings have been bestially murdered, and humanly created achievements and values of many kinds have been destroyed and even irrevocably annihilated. This, as well as unspeakable suffering, misery, and great hardship swept over the humanity of Earth, and from this also millions of deaths were rampant, which caused ever-increasing hatred and vendettas against those who, for some crazy reason, appeared as enemies and spread infinite mischief. On the other hand, it also happened countless times, and still happens today, that others, for trivial and indefinable reasons, simply got into hostilities without thinking or making sense, or were simply regarded as enemies and hated, as is also happening today and will unfortunately continue to happen in the future. In many cases, this has also happened and will continue to happen in the present and future times, on the basis of crazy, confused, and fanatical religious and sectarian grounds, which could not be more idiotic, primitive, and deviant. And all this has happened, is happening, and will continue to happen because the bulk of the vast mass of humanity does not care about what is really good, correct, and positive in terms of the conduct of life, the evolution of consciousness, the values of life itself, and peace, freedom, and true humanity. This, then, has continued into the present time and will continue into the distant future, with power-crazed and vengeful human beings pushing their way into positions of authority and, when they have achieved their desired positions of power, exercising their lust for power. But also the majority of peoples or humanity itself is often hostile among itself, whereby the hostility extends into acquaintances, friendships, and into one's own families. Consequently, also in these areas, quarrels, hatred, envy, nefariousness, as well as mischief, oppression, frightfulness, torment, and violence often prevail up to murder and manslaughter. Wars are instigated by the power-hungry in governments, while feuds break out through incitement in and between families, in acquaintances and friendships, and the friction, evil confrontations. Disputes, quarrels, disputes, controversies, conflicts, squabbles and quarrels, the strife and discord, the hostilities and thus the discord never end, but are incited anew again and again. Many state powers and peoples also devise punishments and decrees in order to spread death and destruction and to eliminate unpleasant adversaries from the world. Just as many rulers also oppress the people with all kinds of inadmissible laws and exploit them through highly exaggerated tax levies in order to enrich themselves on the one hand, or to squander the revenues senselessly, whereby they also accumulate debts and make their peoples bleed for it, driving them into poverty and the country itself into national bankruptcy. For human beings obsessed with power, might is not only a means to an end, but an end in itself. Normally, might is that which makes it possible to do something, whereby in this respect the good, the best, and the positive should always be in the foreground. The fact with human beings on Earth is that power is sought in order to be able to achieve something. But if power obsession then comes into play, then power is exercised for the sake of power and for the sake of self-purpose. In any case, power-obsessed human beings are always willing to do anything for their might. Therefore, it is always advisable that when power obsession is recognized in someone, immediate provision must be made to stop the recognized power behavior if possible. If a human being is addicted to power, then he is also false, corrupt, mean and deceitful, dishonest, devious, greedy for money and deceitful, because absolute power corrupts absolutely and goes over corpses, as has been said in the vernacular since time immemorial. This also means that often human beings who judge themselves to be righteous enter politics, are elected to government office, and are of good will to bring about something good and positive. But once they have made it into the hoped-for office and then actually come to power, then slowly but surely their righteousness disappears, and the power they have attained gradually becomes a lust for power and an end in itself. For many human beings, might is effectively seen as a degenerating lust for power that serves to achieve and maintain the domination of human beings and peoples. This form of power, however, corresponds in every case to violence, and this is inevitably justified by any means, against all law, order, and morality, to achieve the goal aimed at by sheer power and violence. It must therefore be a basic principle that if there are human beings in an environment who are recognized as being greedy for power, caution must be exercised against them and their instructions, actions, deeds, and decrees, etc. First of all, everything should always be well considered, correctly judged, and only then should their instructions and decrees, etc. be followed. This is absolutely necessary, because if there is a real lust for power, then it is already from a purely psychological point of view that such power-obsessed human beings usually deny their obsession with power and attribute their behavior in this regard to other human beings. In doing so, they accuse others of having power, who in reality are not obsessed with power, but who in principle effectively mean well and also work, act, and do good for the good of their fellow human beings, and also know how to take on and bear responsibility. Therefore, it is inevitable that it must always be examined what the real concerns of human beings are in reality and in truth. The fact is that when human beings seek and exercise power for the sake of power, prestige and self-interest, this corresponds not only to a sinister lust for power, but also to an evil will to exercise violence, to oppress, to terror and bloodshed, to self-enrichment and exploitation, as well as corrupting fellow human beings and the people, which not infrequently and even often as a rule must be recorded in the annals of history with murder and manslaughter, uprisings, war, civil war, and destruction. So when human beings seek this kind of power, they are also prepared to cheat, wage war, and commit murder for it, either themselves or through bought assassins who deliberately, in a clandestine, devious way, carry out the murder of a human being. Human beings who are greedy for power therefore practice murder, killing, oppression, and all other malicious violence, and also use all other criminal and underhand means without conscience in order to consolidate their power and to satisfy their greed for power, if they are offered the power and the opportunity to do so, which fortunately nowadays is as a rule, precisely with certain exceptions, only the case with secret services and degenerate dictatorship rulers, and in states that are set up similar to dictatorships. However, such power-related murderous degenerations also occur in religions and sects, be it for the sake of power in relation to a direct leadership rule of a religion or sect, or be it for the sake of exercising power in relation to delusions of a last judgment, whereby suicides and mass suicides are ordered. However, all forms of power should not and must not be tolerated by a single human being, but every human being capable of understanding and reason, indeed even the whole Earth human community, would have to defend itself against it by means of understanding and reason, using violent nonviolence, whereby violent nonviolence consists of intervening solely through clear understanding and logical reason with enlightenment, and words against every malicious form of power or lust for power. This is seen as violence by those who are obsessed with power, but in reality, it is non-violent violence. And in this way, everything should be explained and acted upon by just means to all peoples, in order to enlighten them and prevent those obsessed with power from gaining governmental power and being able to live out and realize their degenerated lust for power correctly. The power that applies to the leadership of human beings and peoples should basically be called the power of responsibility and a sense of responsibility, because with these values, human beings should and must strive to achieve a good cause, commit themselves to every good cause, and know that in order to achieve what they strive for, they must also exercise power in their positions of responsibility not for the sake of power and the end in itself, but for the sake of the human beings and the people. This must be so in every position of office, be it fundamentally beginning in the family, in acquaintances and in friendships, in a local council, in any other local, community or club leadership, in any direct or indirect government office, politics or in the military, etc. Of course, the human being must assert himself in every office, no matter in what bodies, etc. Because the leading or guiding of human beings in every relationship requires the healthy and righteous power of responsibility and the sense of responsibility, the application of which in a righteous manner must be shaped accordingly, depending on the case and situation, just as the case may be, in a hard, loud, or in a soft, normal, or quiet manner. In everything, however, honesty and righteousness must prevail without exception, and the actual positive and good purpose must be fulfilled, for the purpose must always be for a good cause. And the means of achieving this positive and value must also always be good, correct, and lawful. So also, figuratively speaking, one must never go over dead bodies. Seen in this sense, it must always be considered whether the one who is considered and called power-hungry is actually also power-hungry, or whether he acts in a real sense of responsibility that serves the good of human beings, peoples, or a good cause. And it must also be understood that everything is settled with the correct means, words, explanations, and statements, whether loudly or quietly, in a normal tone, or with an agitated and controlled roar. However, it must always be important that what is good, correct, and positive must always be fought for and striven for in order to bring about what is really good, best, and correct.
I find your remarks very good, as well as all the spiritual teaching and knowledge you always impart to me in our private conversations, for which I am grateful.
What you say, Kolkos, is also in the sense of all of us, because we are extremely grateful for all the new things we are always allowed to experience and learn from you concerning spiritual teachings, some of which you also prepare for us in writing. We know that all the many hours you spend for all of us, who are now no longer only 2, but around our 20, always demand great efforts from you. Ow!
Excuse me for interrupting you, because talking about it should be tedious, because I like doing my job, and that also includes this, that I may comply with your wishes and teach and explain to you what is my duty.
And it is, after all, a great deal that you still do for us, and also for Ptah, besides your usual work whereby he can spread all that you teach also on Era, which is also gratefully accepted by all our peoples.
We really should not talk about that, because it shames me that I, as an earthling—
No, do not talk any further because you're—
Now I have to interrupt and say that we should not talk about this any further because I can see that it is embarrassing for you, my friend.
Thanks.
Then I guess it is indeed better to keep quiet and also to leave.
It was not that I wanted you to— Well, if you want to leave, that is of course at your discretion, but if you are not in a hurry, I have 3 private questions to bring up, each concerning yourselves, if you'd like to respond.
Of course, and I think that applies to all of us.
Thanks, also to you, Florena, as well as to you, Kolkos. Then I would like to know, for myself alone, what and how